The spotlight was blinding, but not as blinding as the realization that hit me when I scanned the audience from that stage. 2,000 people had gathered at the Dolby Theater to celebrate young filmmakers. Industry veterans filled the front rows, cameras rolled for national broadcast, and my parents were nowhere to be found. They had chosen their weekly bridge game over watching their daughter receive the most prestigious award a student filmmaker could earn. My name is Alex Chen, and from wherever you're tuning in from, this story might change how you think about success, family, and the price of choosing your own path. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Have you ever achieved something so significant that it felt like your entire life had been building toward that moment, only to realize the people whose approval you craved most were the same ones who had been quietly sabotaging your dreams all along? That night at the Dolby Theater, holding the Golden Lens Award for Best Student Documentary, I understood that my parents hadn't just missed my ceremony. They had been missing me for years. Growing up in Riverside, California, the Chen household operated like a well-oiled machine designed to produce one thing: doctors. My parents, Robert and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in the early 90s with medical degrees and unwavering determination to build a successful practice. They worked 18-hour days, saved every penny, and sacrificed everything to establish Chen Family Medical Associates. Their story was the American dream in action, and they expected their children to honor that legacy by following the same path. My younger brother Tommy understood the assignment perfectly. From the time he could hold a stethoscope, he was their golden child, memorizing medical terminology while other kids played video games, shadowing our parents at the clinic during summer breaks, and maintaining a perfect GPA in pre-med courses at UC San Diego. Tommy was everything they had hoped for: focused, practical, and completely aligned with their vision of success. I was the complication they never planned for. While Tommy dissected frogs in advanced biology, I was in the back corner of the school library, teaching myself to edit videos on an ancient laptop I had bought with money earned from babysitting neighborhood kids, while he attended medical conferences with our parents during family vacations. I snuck away to film documentaries about the hotel staff, fascinated by their stories of dreams deferred and second chances. While he earned praise for his MCAT prep scores, I was staying up until 3 a.m, perfecting a short film about the janitor at our high school who turned out to be a former aerospace engineer whose credentials weren't recognized in America. My parents tolerated my filmmaking the way you might tolerate a child's imaginary friend. Cute for a while, but ultimately something that needed to disappear as I grew up and got serious about real life. They never attended my film screenings, at school, never asked to see my projects, and consistently steered conversations away from my achievements toward Tommy's latest academic triumph or my mediocre performance in science classes. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school when I won the regional student film competition with a documentary called Hidden Stories: The Invisible Workers of Riverside. The film followed 5 people whose daily labor kept our community running but whose personal histories revealed incredible depth and resilience. There was Maria, the cafeteria worker who had been a teacher in El Salvador. David, the school custodian who moonlighted as a jazz musician and had once played backup for touring bands. Sarah, the crossing guard who spoke 4 languages and had been studying for her nursing degree for 6 years while working multiple jobs to support her disabled mother. The documentary took me 8 months to complete. I interviewed dozens of people, learned basic lighting techniques from YouTube tutorials, and spent my entire savings on equipment rentals. When the film won first place at the competition, the local newspaper wanted to write a feature story. The award came with a $5,000 scholarship and automatic entry into the National Student Film Awards. I called my parents from the ceremony, hands shaking with excitement, to share the news. My mother answered the phone with her usual efficiency. "Maya, we're having dinner with the Lims to discuss Tommy's internship opportunity at their cardiology practice. Can this wait until tomorrow?" I stood in the parking lot of the community center where the awards had been presented, trophy in one hand, phone in the other, watching other families celebrate their children's achievements. "Mom, I won. I won the regional film competition. There's a scholarship and I'm going to nationals and the newspaper wants to interview me." There was a pause. Then she said, "That's nice, honey. We'll talk about it later. Don't stay out too." Late. She hung up before I could tell her about the documentary's subject matter, about the months of work, about how the judges had called it mature and socially conscious beyond my years. I drove home to find our house full of family friends celebrating Tommy's acceptance into a prestigious summer research program at UCLA Medical Center. My trophy sat on the kitchen counter next to empty takeout containers, unnoticed and unremarked, until our housekeeper found it the next morning and asked if it belonged to anyone. That night marked the beginning of my understanding that love in our house was conditional, performance-based, and distributed according to how closely our achievements aligned with our parents' predetermined definition of success. Tommy got standing ovations for his science fair projects, while my film festival selections were met with polite nods and immediate subject changes. Our parents attended every one of his academic award ceremonies, but consistently had scheduling conflicts. Whenever I had screenings or competitions, the pattern continued through my first year at UCLA. I had chosen film school despite their vocal disapproval, funding my education through a combination of scholarships, part-time jobs, and student loans that I signed for myself because they refused to co-sign anything related to what they called my hobby. While Tommy's college expenses were covered entirely by our parents, I worked at a coffee shop called Brew and View near campus, pulling double shifts on weekends to afford textbooks and equipment rentals. My parents' disappointment wasn't subtle. During family dinners, they would ask Tommy detailed questions about his coursework, his professors, his research opportunities. When they turned to me, the questions were always the same. "Are you still doing the film thing? Or have you thought about transferring to a more practical major?" They never asked about my classes, my projects, or my professors. They knew nothing about my academic life because they had decided it wasn't worth knowing about. The irony was that I was excelling in ways they never bothered to discover. My freshman documentary about food insecurity among college students had been selected for the UCLA Film Festival. My sophomore project examining the experiences of first-generation immigrant students had won the Dean's Award for Social Impact, Storytelling. By my junior year, I was teaching filmmaking workshops at a community center in East LA, working with kids who reminded me of myself, passionate about creative expression, but surrounded by adults who saw their interests as distractions from more serious pursuits. It was during one of these workshops that I met the subject of my senior thesis film. 15-year-old Isabella Morales had been attending my Saturday sessions for months, always carrying a notebook filled with story ideas and visual concepts that showed an intuitive understanding of narrative structure. When I learned that she was undocumented and facing the possibility of deportation despite having lived in California since she was 3 years old, I knew I had found the story that could make a real difference. Dreams on Hold, Isabella's Story, became my obsession for the entire senior year. I followed Isabella and her family through the complex immigration process, documenting not just their legal struggles, but their emotional journey, their community, support network, and their unwavering hope for a future in the only country Isabella had ever called home. The film required dozens of interviews with lawyers, activists, teachers, and community members. I learned about immigration law, attended court hearings, and spent countless hours earning the trust of a family whose story deserved to be told, with dignity and nuance. The project demanded everything I had learned about filmmaking and more. I crowdfunded the post-production costs, worked with a composer friend to create an original score, and submitted the finished documentary to film festivals across the country. When it was accepted into the National Student Film Awards, I felt a validation that went beyond academic achievement. This wasn't just about winning a competition. It was about using my skills to amplify voices that needed to be heard, to create empathy through storytelling, and to prove that my chosen field could generate real social impact. The National Student Film Awards represented the pinnacle of recognition for emerging filmmakers. Winners received significant cash prizes, mentorship opportunities with industry professionals, and guaranteed consideration for internships at major studios and production companies. The ceremony would be held at the prestigious Dolby Theater in Hollywood, broadcast live on entertainment networks, and attended by some of the most influential figures in the film industry. When I received the notification that Dreams on Hold, Isabella's Story, had been selected as a finalist in the documentary category, I immediately called home to share the news. This time, I was strategic about timing. I called on a Sunday evening when I knew they would be home and available after Tommy had returned to San Diego, when I could have their full attention. "Mom, I have incredible news," I began when she answered. "My documentary has been nominated for the National Student Film Awards. It's being held at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood, and if I win, there are major scholarship opportunities and internship offers from production companies." I could hear the television in the background, the familiar sounds of their Sunday evening routine. "That's nice, Maya," she said with the same tone she might use to acknowledge that I had finished my laundry. "Your father and I have been talking, and we really think you should consider transferring to a business program. You could get into marketing or something related to entertainment, but more stable." "Mom, this is a huge opportunity. The ceremony is being broadcast nationally. Industry professionals will be there. This could literally launch my career." "Maya, we've supported your interests long enough. It's time to think practically about your future. These creative pursuits are fine as hobbies, but you need a real career plan." I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same sensation I had experienced countless times when trying to share my passion with parents who saw it as a phase to be outgrown rather than a calling to be supported. "Will you come to the ceremony?" "It's on Saturday, April 15th. The nominees get to bring guests, and I would really love for you to be there." The pause was long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she said, "Maya, we have our weekly bridge game with the Tangs that night. It's been scheduled for months, and we can't just cancel on them. Besides, your father has a conference call with his medical group the next morning and needs to prepare." "Mom, this is the biggest night of my career so far. Can't you reschedule? Bridge for 1 week? Honey, you have to understand that these events are important for your father's practice. The Tangs refer a lot of patients to us, and maintaining those relationships is crucial for our business. I'm sure your film thing will work out fine whether we're there or not." My film thing. After 4 years of college, countless projects, festival selections, and now a national nomination, my life's work was still just my film thing to them. I hung up the phone, feeling hollow but not surprised. The pattern was so established that their rejection felt almost inevitable. Over the next few weeks, as the ceremony approached, I tried different strategies to change their minds. I sent them articles about previous National Student Film Award winners who had gone on to successful careers in Hollywood. I explained the networking opportunities, the scholarship money, the potential for career advancement. I even offered to pay for their flights and hotel accommodations in Los Angeles. Each conversation ended the same way. They had commitments they couldn't break, responsibilities that took precedence, and a fundamental belief that my achievements weren't significant enough to warrant their attention. Tommy called me after one of these conversations to offer what he thought was comfort. "Maya, you know they love you," he said with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in our parents' affections. "They just worry about your future. They want you to be successful and secure." "Tommy, I am being successful. This nomination is a huge deal in my field." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Why can't they see that? Because your field isn't like medicine, Maya. It's unpredictable. They've worked so hard to build stability for our family, and they want the same for us. Maybe if you showed them how film could lead to a more traditional career path, they would be more supportive." His suggestion revealed how completely he misunderstood both my passion and our parents' expectations. They didn't want me to find a traditional career path within film. They wanted me to abandon film entirely and choose something that fit their narrow definition of professional success. Tommy's career aligned so perfectly with their values that he couldn't comprehend what it felt like to love something they saw as worthless. As the ceremony date approached, I made one final attempt to connect with them. I drove home to Riverside the weekend before the awards, timing my visit to coincide with a quiet Saturday morning when I could have their undivided attention. I brought a laptop and a portable projector, planning to screen Dreams on Hold, Isabella's story for them in our living room. "I want to show you the film that's been nominated," I said, setting up the equipment while they sat on the couch with their morning coffee. "I think if you watch it, you'll understand why this recognition means so much to me and why this isn't just a hobby anymore." They agreed to watch, though my mother kept checking her phone, and my father seemed more interested in the newspaper. As Isabella's story unfolded on the makeshift screen, I watched their faces for reactions, hoping to see some recognition of the technical skill, emotional depth, and social relevance I had worked so hard to achieve. The documentary was 38 minutes long. It opened with Isabella in her high school journalism class, writing about her dreams of attending college and becoming a civil rights lawyer. It followed her family through their daily routines while living under the constant threat of deportation, showed their deep roots in the community, and documented their legal fight to remain in the country. The film included interviews with Isabella's teachers, who spoke about her academic excellence and leadership potential, and with community members, who had rallied to support the family's legal case. When the credits rolled, there was silence. Then my father folded his newspaper and said, "Maya, this is very sad, but what does it have to do with your career? You can't make a living following people around with a camera, documenting their problems." My mother nodded in agreement. "It's heartbreaking what that family is going through, but I don't understand how making films about difficult situations is going to provide you with financial security. What happens when you want to buy a house or start a family? This kind of work seems more like volunteer activity than a profession." I felt something break inside me that morning, not dramatically but quietly, like a thread that had been stretched, too thin for too long, finally snapping. They had watched 38 minutes of my best work, a film that had moved audiences to tears and action, that had been recognized by industry professionals as exceptional, and their only response was to question its commercial viability and my life choices. "I'm not asking you to understand my career," I said, packing up my equipment with hands that trembled slightly from anger and disappointment. "I'm asking you to support me as your daughter. I'm asking you to show up for one night, to celebrate, something I've worked incredibly hard to achieve, to demonstrate that my accomplishments matter to you, even if they're different from what you would have chosen for me." My mother reached out to touch my arm. "Maya, of course your accomplishments matter to us. We just want what's best for you. We want you to be happy and secure." "Then come to the ceremony," I said simply. "If my happiness matters to you, be there on the most important night of my career so far. Cancel bridge, reschedule the conference, call. Show up for me the way you've shown up for Tommy countless times." They exchanged a look that I had seen countless times before, the same expression they wore when I was younger, and asking for things they considered unreasonable. It was a look that said they would indulge me to a point, but I was pushing beyond their limits of patience. "Maya, we've already made commitments," my father said with finality. "We can't just cancel on the tangs at the last minute. That would be rude and unprofessional. You'll do fine at your ceremony whether we're there or not. These things are really more for the participants than the families anyway." I left that afternoon knowing with absolute certainty that they would not be at the Dolby Theater on Saturday night. I also knew that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship, though I couldn't yet articulate what it was. For years, I had been chasing their approval, modifying my dreams to make them more palatable, trying to prove that my chosen path was worthy of their respect. That day, I stopped chasing. The week leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of final preparations. I had interviews with entertainment bloggers, participated in a panel discussion with other nominees, and attended networking events with industry professionals who treated my work with the seriousness and respect my own parents had never shown. The contrast was stark and painful. Strangers were investing time in understanding my artistic vision, while my family remained committed to their bridge game. Jordan Martinez, my best friend since sophomore year, noticed my distraction during our final preparation meeting at a coffee shop near campus. "Maya, you've been weird all week. Are you nervous about Saturday?" I told her about my parents' refusal to attend, about the years of being dismissed and overlooked, about the growing realization that their love came with conditions I could never meet while remaining true to myself. Jordan listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to anger to something that looked like grief. "Maya, I'm so sorry," she said when I finished. "I had no idea it was that bad at home. I mean, I knew they wanted you to be a doctor, but I didn't realize they were actively sabotaging your confidence and refusing to support your actual achievements." "It's not sabotage exactly," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wondered if that was precisely what it was. They just don't understand what I'm doing or why it matters. "Understanding isn't a prerequisite for support," Jordan said, firmly. "My parents don't understand half of what I'm studying in my neuroscience program, but they show up to everything because they love me and want to celebrate my successes. Your parents are choosing not to understand because acknowledging your talent would mean admitting they've been wrong about your potential for years." Her words crystallized something I had been feeling but couldn't name. My parents' dismissal of my achievements wasn't just about their preference for traditional careers. It was about their inability to admit that they had been wrong about me, that they had wasted years overlooking and underestimating their own daughter, that their narrow definition of success had blinded them to the remarkable person I was becoming, despite their lack of support. "You know what?" Jordan continued, her voice gaining strength and conviction. "Forget them. You've built an incredible career without their help, and you're going to win that award because you deserve it. And when you do, when you're standing on that stage with cameras rolling and the whole industry watching, you'll thank the people who actually supported you along the way. You'll thank Ms. Rodriguez for believing in you when you were just a high school kid with a borrowed camera. You'll thank your professors who pushed you to take creative risks. You'll thank Isabella and her family for trusting you with their story. You'll thank everyone who saw your potential and helped you develop it. And your parents will be at home playing cards, watching on television, realizing exactly what they missed." As she spoke, I felt something shifting inside me. Not the familiar ache of disappointment, but something sharper and more empowering. For the first time, I began to imagine the ceremony not as an event my parents were missing, but as a celebration of everyone who had actually contributed to my success. The spotlight wouldn't reveal their absence so much as it would illuminate the presence of people who had truly supported my dreams. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp Los Angeles morning that made everything feel possible. I woke up in my shared apartment near campus, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains Jordan had helped me hang freshman year. My roommate Alex, Kim, was already awake, sitting at our tiny kitchen table with her laptop open and a cup of coffee steaming beside her editing timeline. "Big day, superstar," she said without looking up from her screen. "How are you feeling?" The honest answer was complicated. I felt excited about the ceremony, proud of my nomination, nervous about the competition, and hollow about my parents' absence. But I had decided the night before, lying awake listening to the distant hum of traffic on Sunset Boulevard, that I would not let their choice diminish my joy in this achievement. "I feel ready," I said. And as the words left my mouth, I realized they were true. Alex closed her laptop and turned to face me with the serious expression she reserved for important conversations. "Maya, I've been thinking about what you told me about your parents not coming tonight. I know it hurts, but I want you to remember something. You didn't get nominated because your family supported you. You got nominated because you're exceptionally talented and because you created something meaningful. That comes from inside you, not from anyone else's validation." Alex understood creative struggle in ways that few people did. She was a film student too, but she specialized in experimental narrative work that pushed the boundaries of traditional storytelling. Her parents, both software engineers in San Francisco, had initially been skeptical of her artistic pursuits, but had gradually come to appreciate her unique vision. They would be in the audience tonight, sitting with Jordan's parents and Ms. Rodriguez, the high school teacher who had first encouraged my filmmaking ambitions. The irony wasn't lost on me that my chosen family would be better represented at this ceremony than my biological one. Over the years, I had built a network of people who understood and supported my artistic vision. There was Ms. Rodriguez, who had stayed after school countless times to help me learn editing software, and who still sent me articles about young filmmakers making breakthroughs in the industry. There was Professor Martinez from UCLA, who had pushed me to tackle more ambitious projects and who had written the recommendation letter that helped me secure the community center teaching position. There was Coach Williams from my high school debate team, who had taught me how to structure arguments and present ideas persuasively, skills that had proven invaluable in documentary filmmaking. These people had invested in my success not because they were obligated by blood relations, but because they recognized something worth nurturing. They had shown up to my screenings, celebrated my victories, and provided encouragement during moments of doubt. Tonight, they would be in the audience, wearing formal attire and carrying the pride that my own parents had chosen not to feel. The morning passed quickly with last-minute preparations. I had my hair styled at a salon in Beverly Hills, a luxury I had saved for months to afford. The stylist, a woman named Carmen who had worked on several film sets, understood the importance of the evening and took extra care to create an elegant updo that would photograph well under stage lights. As she worked, she told me stories about other young artists she had styled for their breakthrough moments, each narrative reinforcing that I was part of a larger community of creative professionals supporting each other's success. My dress hung in Alex's closet, a midnight blue gown I had found at a consignment shop in West Hollywood. It was simple but sophisticated, with clean lines that would look timeless in photographs. I had chosen it because it made me feel confident and professional, like someone who belonged among industry veterans and established filmmakers. When I put it on that afternoon, with Alex helping me with the zipper and Jordan arriving early to do my makeup, I felt myself transforming into the person I had been working to become for years. "You look like a director," Jordan said, stepping back to admire her handiwork with the makeup brushes. "You look like someone who wins awards." The car service arrived at 4 o'clock to take me to the Dolby Theater. Alex and Jordan would follow later with the rest of my support group, but nominees were required to arrive early for rehearsals and media interviews. As the black sedan wound through Hollywood traffic, I watched the familiar landmarks of my adopted city pass by the window. I had moved to Los Angeles with dreams and determination, but no connections or family support. 4 years later, I was riding to one of the most prestigious venues in the entertainment capital of the world, nominated for an award that could launch my career into orbit. The Dolby Theater was even more impressive than I had imagined. Red carpets stretched across the entrance, photographers positioned at strategic angles, and security personnel directing the flow of arriving nominees, industry professionals, and media representatives. I checked in at the registration desk, received my identification badge and program, and was directed to a green room where other nominees were gathering for the mandatory briefing. The energy in that room was electric. 24 filmmakers from colleges across the country, each representing different categories and approaches to storytelling, all united by the recognition that their work had risen above thousands of submissions to earn this moment. I found myself in conversation with Marcus Johnson, whose narrative short film about growing up in Detroit had been selected in the fiction category, and Elena Vasquez, whose experimental documentary about climate change and indigenous communities had garnered significant critical attention. "This is surreal," Marcus said, adjusting his bow tie nervously. "6 months ago, I was editing this film in my dorm room at 3 a.m, wondering if anyone would ever see it. Now we're here." Elena nodded in agreement. "I keep thinking about all the people who told me documentary filmmaking wasn't a real career. My uncle still asks when I'm going to get a real job." Their stories resonated deeply with my own experience. We were a room full of young artists who had pursued our visions despite skepticism from family members, financial constraints, and an industry known for its competitiveness and uncertainty. Yet, here we were, dressed in formal wear, preparing to have our work celebrated on a national stage. The rehearsal process was surprisingly detailed. We practiced walking to the microphone, were briefed on the timing for acceptance speeches, and learned about the camera angles and lighting cues that would capture our reactions throughout the evening. The ceremony's director, a veteran of awards, shows, and live television, emphasized that this broadcast would reach millions of viewers and could significantly impact our future opportunities in the industry. "Remember that this is not just about tonight," she told us during the final briefing. "This is about launching careers, building networks, and demonstrating that the future of filmmaking is in capable hands. The industry is watching, and they're looking for fresh voices and unique perspectives. You've already proven you have those qualities by being here." As the briefing concluded and we were given time to prepare for the ceremony, I found a quiet corner in the green room and pulled out my phone. Part of me hoped to find a message from my parents, perhaps a last-minute change of heart or a simple wish for good luck. Instead, I found a text from Tommy sent an hour earlier. "Good luck tonight, Maya. I know this is important to you." It was a small gesture, but it carried more weight than he probably realized. Tommy had never shown much interest in my filmmaking, but his acknowledgement that this evening mattered to me felt like a crack in the family's unified dismissal of my achievements. I texted back a simple thank you, wondering if he would watch the broadcast and what he might think if I won. At 6 o'clock, guests began arriving for the ceremony. Through the green room's monitor, I could watch the red carpet coverage and see familiar faces from the film industry walking past photographers and reporters. But more importantly, I could see my people taking their seats in the theater. There was Ms. Rodriguez, wearing an elegant black dress and carrying herself with the dignity of someone who had influenced countless students over her teaching career. Professor Martinez had arrived with his wife, both of them scanning the room with the excited expressions of proud mentors. Jordan's parents were easy to spot because they looked exactly like older versions of my best friend, and they were carrying a small bouquet of flowers that I knew was meant for me. Alex's parents had driven down from San Francisco, and I could see them chatting animatedly with Coach Williams, who had made the trip from Riverside. The sight of these people, dressed in their finest clothes and gathered to celebrate my achievement, filled me with a warmth that temporarily overshadowed the absence of my biological family. At 7:30, we were called to take our places for the ceremony's opening. The theater was packed with industry professionals, film students, academics, and the families of nominees. As I walked through the backstage area toward my assigned seat in the front section, I caught a glimpse of the audience through a gap in the curtains. 2,000 people had gathered to celebrate emerging filmmakers, and the energy in the room was palpable. The ceremony began with performances by students from various film schools, showcasing the diversity and creativity of the next generation of filmmakers. There were musical presentations, short film excerpts, and speeches from industry, veterans about the importance of supporting emerging talent. Each segment reinforced that I was part of something larger than individual competition. I was part of a community dedicated to the art and craft of storytelling through film. When they announced the documentary category, my heart began beating, so loudly that I wondered if the people around me could hear it. The presenter, a documentary filmmaker whose work I had studied in my classes, spoke about the power of nonfiction storytelling to create empathy, drive social change, and preserve important voices and experiences. Documentary filmmakers have the unique responsibility of bearing witness to truth, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the theater's excellent acoustics. They must earn the trust of their subjects, navigate complex ethical considerations, and create narratives that honor both artistic vision and factual accuracy. This year's nominees have demonstrated exceptional skill in all of these areas. As she began describing each nominated film, I felt myself entering a strange state of hyper-awareness. I could hear individual conversations in the audience, smell someone's perfume from 3 rows behind me, and feel the texture of my dress fabric against my skin. When she started discussing Dreams on Hold, Isabella's story, describing it as a nuanced and compassionate examination of immigration policy's human impact, I realized that regardless of the evening's outcome, my work had been seen and understood by people whose opinions carried real weight in the industry. The winner of this year's Golden Lens Award for Best Student Documentary is Alex Chen for Dreams on Hold, Isabella's Story. The words seemed to reach my ears from a great distance, as if they were traveling through water or thick air. Around me, people were applauding, but the sound felt muffled and dreamlike. I stood up automatically, my body moving without conscious direction, and began walking toward the stage. The spotlight found me as I climbed the steps, and suddenly, everything came into sharp focus. I was standing at the podium in the Dolby Theater, holding a golden award that reflected the stage lights, looking out at an audience of 2,000 people who were applauding my achievement. Cameras were recording my image for national broadcast, and somewhere in the audience were people who had believed in me long before this moment arrived. But as I scanned the theater, looking for my supporters, I also registered the absence that had shaped this entire experience. Seats that should have held my parents were occupied by strangers. People who shared my DNA and my childhood home were somewhere in Riverside, playing bridge with friends and discussing Tommy's latest medical school achievements, unaware that their daughter was experiencing the most significant moment of her career so far. The realization hit me with unexpected clarity. I didn't need their presence to validate this achievement. I had earned this recognition through my own talent, determination, and vision. The people who had contributed to my success were right. There in the audience, cheering for a young woman they had helped nurture into the filmmaker she had become. I adjusted the microphone and began to speak, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. This award represents more than recognition for a single film. It represents the power of storytelling to create connection across difference. And it belongs to everyone who supported this project and my journey as a filmmaker. As I continued my acceptance speech, I began thanking people by name. I thanked Isabella and her family for trusting me with their story, and for their courage in allowing cameras to document such a vulnerable time in their lives. I thanked the UCLA Film School faculty who had pushed me to develop my technical skills and ethical framework as a documentary filmmaker. I thanked the community center in East LA, where I taught workshops, and where I had learned as much from my students as they had learned from me. I want to thank Ms. Rodriguez, my high school film teacher, who saw potential in a teenage girl with big dreams and a borrowed camera, I said, finding her face in the audience and watching her wipe tears from her eyes. I want to thank Professor Martinez, who taught me that documentary filmmaking is both an art and a responsibility. I want to thank Jordan Martinez, Alex Kim, and all of my fellow film students who have challenged me to be better and who have shared this journey with me. With each name I spoke, I felt myself growing stronger and more centered. These were the people who had invested in my success, who had shown up for my screenings, who had provided encouragement during moments of doubt. They were my real family, chosen and earned through shared values and mutual support. I want to thank Coach Williams, who taught me in high school that the best arguments are built on thorough research and passionate conviction. Those lessons have guided every documentary I've made. I want to thank Carmen, who did my hair today, and who reminded me that every artist deserves to feel beautiful on their big night. As I neared the end of my speech, I made a choice that surprised even me. Instead of offering generic thanks to family, instead of following the expected script of acknowledgments, I spoke directly about the people who had shaped my artistic vision and supported my unconventional dreams. Most importantly, I want to thank every person who has ever been told that their creative dreams aren't practical, aren't valuable, or aren't worth pursuing. To the young filmmakers watching tonight who are working part-time jobs to afford equipment, who are staying up late editing in dorm rooms and coffee shops, who are fighting for every opportunity to tell the stories that matter to them, your work has value. Your voice deserves to be heard, and your dreams are worth the sacrifice. I raised the award above my head, feeling its weight and significance. This is for everyone who believes that art can change the world, one story at a time. The applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was warm and genuine. As I walked off the stage, clutching my award and trying to process what had just happened, I felt a profound sense of completion. I had publicly acknowledged the people who had truly contributed to my success, and I had done so without bitterness or regret about those who had chosen not to participate in this journey. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, interviews, and networking conversations. Industry professionals approached me with business cards and project ideas. Fellow nominees shared contact information and discussed potential collaborations. Media representatives asked about my future plans and my inspiration for the winning documentary. But the moment that meant the most came when the ceremony concluded, and I was reunited with my support group in the theater lobby. Ms. Rodriguez hugged me tightly and whispered, "I am so proud of the filmmaker and the woman you've become." Professor Martinez introduced me to his wife as the most promising documentary filmmaker I've ever taught. Jordan's parents told me they felt honored to have witnessed such an important moment in my career. Alex's mother, whom I had met only once before, pulled me aside and said something that caught me completely off guard. "Maya, I watched your speech, and I was struck by how graciously you handled what must be a difficult situation. It takes real maturity to focus on gratitude rather than resentment when people disappoint you." Her observation made me realize that my parents' absence had been noticed not just by me, but by others in the audience who understood family dynamics and the significance of showing up for major life events. Yet instead of dwelling on disappointment, I had chosen to celebrate the relationships that had actually nurtured my success. As we left the Dolby Theater that night, walking past photographers and reporters who were wrapping up their coverage, I felt a lightness that I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of constantly seeking my parents' approval, of trying to prove that my chosen career path was worthy of their respect, had lifted. I had succeeded without their support, and that success felt entirely my own. The after-party was held at a rooftop venue in West Hollywood, with city lights sparkling below and industry professionals mingling with nominees and their guests. I found myself in fascinating conversations about documentary ethics, funding, strategies for independent films, and the role of emerging filmmakers in addressing social issues through their work. A producer from a major streaming platform approached me with interest in developing Dreams on Hold into a longer format series, following other families navigating the immigration system. A talent agent wanted to discuss representation for future projects. A festival programmer invited me to submit my next documentary to several prestigious international film festivals. Each conversation reinforced that winning this award was not an ending, but a beginning. Doors were opening that had been closed before, and opportunities were presenting themselves that could shape the trajectory of my entire career. I had the skills, the vision, and now the recognition to pursue increasingly ambitious projects. As the evening wound down and my support group prepared to return to their hotels and homes, I stood on the rooftop terrace looking out at the city where I had chosen to pursue my dreams despite my family's objections. 4 years earlier, I had arrived in Los Angeles as an uncertain 18-year-old with a passion for filmmaking and no clear path forward. Tonight, I was holding a national award and fielding offers from industry professionals who saw my potential. Jordan found me on the terrace, holding 2 glasses of champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had watched her friend achieve a long-sought goal. "How does it feel?" she asked, handing me a glass. I considered the question seriously. How did it feel to win an award my parents hadn't bothered to witness? How did it feel to be celebrated by strangers while being ignored by family? How did it feel to realize that I had built a successful career and meaningful relationships entirely outside of their influence or support? "It feels like freedom," I said finally. "It feels like I don't need anyone's permission to be proud of who I'm becoming." We toasted to the future, to the projects we would create, to the stories we would tell, and to the realization that sometimes the most important validation comes not from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, but from those who choose to support you because they recognize your worth. The morning after the ceremony arrived with an intensity I hadn't anticipated. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, messages, and calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Social media algorithms had latched onto clips of my acceptance, speech, and suddenly strangers across the country were sharing their own stories of pursuing creative dreams despite family opposition. I sat in my small apartment kitchen, still wearing the comfortable clothes I had changed into after returning from the after-party, scrolling through hundreds of comments and messages. Young artists from every discipline imaginable had reached out to share their experiences. A dancer whose parents wanted her to study accounting, a musician whose family saw his compositions as noise, a writer whose relatives questioned why she wasted time on stories no one would read. But it wasn't just the volume of responses that surprised me. It was the quality of opportunities that had materialized overnight. My email inbox contained inquiries from production companies, film festivals, and educational institutions. A documentary about my documentary was being proposed by a major streaming platform. Universities were extending speaking engagement invitations. Grant organizations were suggesting I apply for funding that could support my next project. The contrast with my family's silence was stark and telling. While thousands of strangers were celebrating my achievement and recognizing its significance, the people who had raised me remained conspicuously absent from the conversation. No congratulatory text messages, no phone calls, no acknowledgement that their daughter had achieved something noteworthy on a national stage. Alex emerged from her bedroom with coffee and a concerned expression. "Maya, have you seen the entertainment news coverage? You're everywhere." She showed me her laptop screen, where entertainment blogs and industry publications were running. Stories about the ceremony with headlines like, "Rising documentary star thanks everyone but family," and "UCLA student's emotional speech goes viral." The articles analyzed my acceptance speech, noting the conspicuous absence of family acknowledgments and speculating about the story behind my gratitude list. "This is bigger than just the award," Alex continued, settling beside me on our second-hand couch. "People are responding to something deeper in your speech. It's becoming a cultural moment about chosen family and pursuing dreams without traditional support systems." She was right. The viral response wasn't really about documentary, filmmaking, or even about my specific achievement. It was about a universal experience of having to choose between family approval and personal authenticity, between safe expectations and risky dreams. My story had become a proxy for conversations that many people had been wanting to have about loyalty, support, and the courage to disappoint people in order to remain true to yourself. By noon, my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar Los Angeles number. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Rebecca Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, calling from a major talent agency that represented directors, producers, and other creative professionals in the film industry. "Maya, I watched your speech last night, and I've been following the response to your documentary work," she said with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to making deals and launching careers. "I'd like to meet with you this week to discuss representation. Based on the industry reaction and the opportunities I'm already seeing come in, I think we could build something significant together." The conversation lasted 20 minutes and covered territory I had never imagined navigating at 22 years old. She spoke about 3 picture deals, streaming platform partnerships, and the kind of career trajectory that could establish me as a major voice in documentary filmmaking within 5 years. She mentioned directors whose work I admired, producers whose projects had won Academy Awards, and distribution strategies that could amplify the social impact of my future films. "The industry is hungry for authentic voices and stories that matter," she explained. "Your technical skills are impressive, but what's really catching attention is your ability to create emotional connection while addressing serious social issues. That combination is rare and valuable." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. 6 months earlier, I had been working double shifts at the coffee shop to afford editing software. Now I was fielding calls from agencies that represented filmmakers, whose movies I had studied in class, whose careers I had analyzed as examples of artistic and commercial success. The irony wasn't lost on me that this validation was coming from everyone except the people whose approval I had spent years seeking. Strangers were investing time and resources in my potential, while my own parents remained committed to their bridge game and their belief that my achievements were somehow less significant than my brother's medical school progress. Jordan arrived that afternoon with takeout food and a stack of printed articles about the ceremony coverage. "Maya, you need to eat something, and you need to see how big this has gotten," she said, spreading newspaper clippings and printed web pages across my coffee table. The coverage was extensive and overwhelmingly positive. Industry publications were calling my documentary sophisticated and my speech authentic. Social media influencers were sharing clips with commentary about the importance of supporting young artists. Educational blogs were using my story as an example of persistence paying off despite lack of family support. But the piece that hit me most powerfully was an op-ed in a major newspaper written by a prominent film critic who had attended the ceremony. She had written about the moment when I thanked my supporters by name, noting the deliberate care I had taken to acknowledge people who had contributed to my artistic development. "What struck me most about Maya Chen's acceptance speech," the critic had written, "was not what she didn't say, but what she chose to emphasize. Instead of following traditional scripts about family support, she created a new narrative about chosen community and earned recognition. She demonstrated that gratitude can be both generous and selective, that acknowledgement is something to be given thoughtfully rather than automatically." The critic went on to analyze my documentary work, placing Dreams on Hold, Isabella's story, in the context of other films that had used personal stories to illuminate larger social issues. She described my approach as mature beyond my years and predicted that I would become an important voice in socially conscious filmmaking. Reading her analysis, I felt a validation that went beyond awards or industry recognition. Someone whose job was to critically evaluate artistic work had seen something in my approach that justified the choices I had made, both as a filmmaker and as a person navigating complicated family dynamics. That evening, as I was preparing dinner and trying to process the day's developments, my phone rang with a call from a Riverside number I recognized immediately. It was Tommy, calling from what I assumed was our parents' house. "Maya, I need to talk to you about last night," he said without preamble. His voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before, as if he was struggling with something he couldn't quite articulate. "Did you watch the ceremony?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on the evening. "I watched your speech online this morning. Maya, I had no idea things were so bad between you and Mom and Dad. I mean, I knew they wanted you to study something more practical, but I didn't realize they were completely dismissing your achievements." There was a long pause before he continued. "I kept waiting for you to thank them during your speech. And when you didn't, when you thanked all those other people instead, I started thinking about all the times they came to my events and all the times they found excuses to miss yours." His acknowledgement of the pattern surprised me. For years, Tommy had seemed oblivious to the differential treatment we received, accepting our parents' attention as his natural due while remaining unaware of my exclusion from their support and celebration. "Tommy, I've been trying to get their attention and approval for years," I said carefully. "Last night wasn't about punishing them. It was about recognizing the people who actually supported my dreams when it would have been easier to dismiss them. I know, and that's what makes me feel terrible. Maya, I should have been one of those people. I should have come to your screenings and asked about your projects and stood up for you when they were being dismissive. I was so focused on my own path that I didn't notice how hard yours was." His honesty was both painful and healing. Part of me wanted to tell him that his recognition was coming too late, that I had needed his support years earlier when I was struggling to convince our parents that my dreams were worth pursuing. But another part of me appreciated that he was acknowledging the situation now, even if it couldn't change the past. "What are Mom and Dad saying about the coverage?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Tommy's response revealed the depth of our family's dysfunction around my success. "They're pretending it's not happening. Dad saw something on the news this morning about local student wins national award, and he changed the channel. Mom got a call from Mrs. Wang asking about your ceremony, and she said she didn't know you were receiving any awards." The casual denial of my achievement, the refusal to acknowledge that something significant had happened in their daughter's life, crystallized everything I had been feeling about our relationship. They weren't just unsupportive. They were actively choosing ignorance over engagement, dismissal over curiosity. "Tommy, they watched me grow up loving filmmaking, working toward this goal, sacrificing other opportunities to pursue this dream. And when I finally achieved something meaningful, something that validates all of that work, they're pretending it didn't happen rather than admitting they were wrong about me." "I know," he said quietly. "And I think that's exactly why they can't acknowledge it. Admitting that you've succeeded would mean admitting that they spent years underestimating and undermining their own daughter. It would mean acknowledging that their narrow definition of success caused them to miss something important about who you are." His analysis was more perceptive than I had expected. Tommy had always seemed so aligned with our parents' values that I hadn't credited him with the ability to see their limitations. But perhaps watching my success from the outside had given him a perspective on our family dynamics that proximity had previously obscured. "Maya, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I don't understand everything about filmmaking, but I understand that what you did last night was significant, and I understand that you accomplished it despite not having the support you deserved from your own family." We talked for another hour, the longest and most honest conversation we had ever had about our family and our different relationships with our parents' expectations. Tommy admitted that the pressure to follow their prescribed path had been intense for him too, but that the rewards for compliance had made it easier to accept. He also acknowledged that watching my speech had forced him to confront how much courage it had taken for me to pursue my own vision despite their opposition. The conversation ended with a promise that he would make more effort to understand and support my work going forward. It wasn't a complete repair of our relationship, but it was a beginning of something more honest and mutual than we had shared before. Over the following days, the momentum from the award ceremony continued building in unexpected directions. The documentary streaming platform that had initially expressed interest in expanding Dreams on Hold into a series reached out with a formal development deal. Isabella and her family, whose legal case had progressed positively since the documentary's completion, agreed to participate in the extended project. A major film festival in Canada invited me to present the documentary as part of their social justice programming, with travel and accommodation expenses covered. 3 different universities extended guest lecturer invitations for their film and media studies programs. A foundation focused on supporting immigrant families reached out about using the documentary as part of their educational outreach efforts. Each opportunity represented not just professional advancement, but validation that my work was having the kind of social impact I had hoped for when I first picked up a camera. The stories I was telling were reaching audiences, creating empathy, and contributing to important conversations about justice and human dignity. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Ms. Rodriguez called me on Thursday evening with excitement barely contained in her voice. "Maya, I have to tell you what happened in my classes this week," she began. "I showed your acceptance speech to my current film students, and the response has been incredible. 3 students who were considering transferring to more practical majors have decided to stay with their creative programs. 2 students have approached me about starting a documentary project focused on issues in our community. One student told me that watching you succeed despite family opposition gave her the courage to pursue directing instead of just cinematography. Her report reinforced something I was beginning to understand about the ripple effects of visibility and representation. By succeeding publicly and acknowledging the unconventional support system that had made my success possible, I had inadvertently created a new narrative about what artistic achievement could look like for young people from families that prioritize traditional career paths. But there's something else," Ms. Rodriguez continued. "I got a call yesterday from a parent who was upset that I was showing your speech in class. She felt that you were encouraging students to disrespect their families and pursue unrealistic dreams." The criticism didn't surprise me, but it did clarify something important about the cultural moment my speech had apparently created. For some people, my success threatened their worldview about the necessity of family approval and traditional career paths. By demonstrating that artistic dreams could be pursued successfully without parental support, I had challenged assumptions about loyalty, practicality, and the relationship between love and approval. "How did you respond to her?" I asked. I told her that I was teaching students about courage, authenticity, and the importance of building supportive communities around their goals. I explained that your story isn't about disrespecting family, but about taking responsibility for your own dreams when the people around you aren't able to support them. Her response highlighted the educational value of what had happened at the ceremony. My experience was becoming a case study in resilience, chosen family, and the complex navigation of competing loyalties that many young people face when their authentic selves don't align with their family's expectations. That weekend, I attended a panel discussion at UCLA about careers in documentary filmmaking. What had been scheduled as a small workshop for film students had been expanded due to increased interest following the award ceremony coverage. The auditorium was packed with students from multiple universities, young professionals seeking career changes, and community members interested in using storytelling for social change. During the question and answer session, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "How do you handle family members who don't understand or support your creative work?" The question had clearly been prompted by the public discussion of my own family situation, but it represented a challenge that extended far beyond my personal experience. In my response, I tried to address both the practical and emotional aspects of pursuing artistic careers without traditional support systems. First, you have to separate your sense of self-worth from other people's understanding of your work, I said. Family members who don't support your creative goals aren't necessarily making statements about your value as a person. They might be expressing their own fears about financial security, their limited understanding of creative industries, or their genuine concern for your well-being. I continued by discussing the importance of building alternative support networks, seeking mentorship from people within your chosen field, and developing the emotional resilience to persist through periods of doubt and external criticism. But, ultimately, I concluded, you have to decide whether you're going to live according to other people's definitions of success or according to your own vision of a meaningful life. That choice has consequences either way, and you have to be prepared to accept responsibility for whichever path you choose. The audience's response was engaged and emotional. Several people approached me afterward to share their own stories of family conflict around creative careers, and many asked for advice about specific challenges they were facing. One conversation particularly stayed with me. A young man named David, probably around my age, told me that he had been accepted to law school primarily to satisfy his parents' expectations, but that watching my acceptance speech had convinced him to defer enrollment and pursue his actual interest in music production. I realized that I was about to spend 3 years and accumulate massive debt studying something I didn't care about, just to avoid disappointing people who might never understand what I really want to do anyway, he said. Your speech made me realize that their disappointment might be temporary, but my regret about abandoning my dreams could last forever. His story reinforced my growing understanding that the ceremony had created more than just a career moment for me. It had become a catalyst for other people to examine their own relationships with family expectations, creative ambitions, and the courage required to choose authenticity over approval. As I drove home from the panel that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in less than a week. The award itself was significant, but the conversations it had sparked, the opportunities it had created, and the community it had revealed were transforming my understanding of what success could look like. I was building a career based on my own vision and values, supported by people who shared my commitment to meaningful storytelling. I was contributing to important conversations about social justice, artistic courage, and alternative definitions of family and support. I was discovering that validation from the right people could be more powerful than approval from everyone. Most importantly, I was learning that sometimes the most profound acts of love toward family members involve having the courage to disappoint them in service of becoming who you're meant to be. My parents' absence from the ceremony had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. It had forced me to identify and celebrate the relationships that actually sustained my growth, and to build my identity around chosen connections rather than obligated ones. The woman I was becoming was stronger, more independent, and more aligned with her authentic values than the woman who had spent years seeking approval from people who were fundamentally unable to offer it. And that transformation I was beginning to understand was worth more than any award. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my phone rang at 8 a.m. with a call that would shift everything once again. The number displayed was from Riverside, but it wasn't Tommy's cell phone. It was the landline to my parents' house, a number I hadn't seen on my caller ID in months. My mother's voice was strained when I answered, carrying a formality that suggested she had rehearsed what she planned to say. "Maya, we need to talk. Your father and I would like you to come home this weekend for dinner. There are things we need to discuss." The invitation felt loaded with implications I couldn't immediately decipher. In the 3 weeks since the ceremony, they had maintained their silence about my achievement, even as news coverage continued and opportunities multiplied. Now, suddenly, they wanted to talk, using the kind of serious tone typically reserved for major family announcements or difficult conversations. "What kinds of things?" I asked, keeping my own voice neutral despite the curiosity and wariness competing in my chest. "Maya, please just come home. We'll explain everything when you're here. Can you be here Saturday at 6? There was something in her tone that suggested this wasn't really a request, despite being phrased as one. It carried the expectation of compliance that had shaped family interactions throughout my childhood. The assumption that when my parents declared something important, my attendance was automatic rather than optional. "I'll be there," I said. though part of me wondered if I was making a mistake by agreeing so readily. The drive to Riverside that Saturday felt different than it had during previous visits. Instead of approaching my childhood home with the familiar mixture of affection and frustration, I felt detached, almost clinical in my observation of the suburban streets where I had grown up. The palm trees lining our neighborhood looked exactly the same. The Spanish-style houses maintained their beige uniformity, and the sense of comfortable predictability that defined this community remained unchanged. But I was different. The woman driving down these familiar streets was someone who had been celebrated on national television, whose work was being developed by major streaming platforms, whose name was being mentioned in industry publications alongside established filmmakers. The contrast between who I had become and the environment where my parents still expected me to be the compliant daughter seeking their approval felt jarring and illuminating. I parked in the driveway beside my father's sedan, noting that Tommy's car was also there. Whatever this conversation was supposed to address, they had apparently decided it required both children to be present. I wondered if they were planning some kind of intervention, a family meeting designed to convince me that my recent success was somehow problematic or unsustainable. The front door opened before I could knock, and my mother appeared wearing the kind of outfit she typically reserved for important social occasions. Her smile was tighter than usual, and she seemed to be evaluating my appearance as if looking for changes that might reflect my recent experiences. "Maya, you look tired," she said, which had always been her way of expressing concern without admitting worry. "Come in. Your father's in the living room with Tommy." The house smelled exactly as it always had, a combination of my mother's preferred vanilla candles and the lingering aroma of whatever elaborate meal she had prepared for the evening. Family photos lined the hallway, documenting graduations, vacations, and achievements spanning decades. As I walked past them, I noticed something that had never registered before. The progression of images showed Tommy's accomplishments prominently displayed while my achievements were represented by standard school portraits and group family shots. Tommy was sitting on the couch in the living room, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he had been briefed on the purpose of this gathering, but wasn't entirely supportive of the approach. My father occupied his usual chair, wearing the serious expression he adopted for discussions about finances, discipline, or other matters he considered grave. "Maya, sit down," my father said, gesturing toward the chair across from his. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since your award ceremony, and there are some things we need to address." I settled into the indicated chair, noting that the seating arrangement positioned me as the focus of their attention while allowing them to present a united front. It felt like a setup for confrontation rather than conversation, though I couldn't yet determine what they were confronting me about. My mother took her place beside Tommy on the couch, and for a moment, the four of us sat in silence while my parents seemed to gather themselves for whatever they had planned to say. The quiet stretched long enough that I began to wonder if they were waiting for me to speak first, to offer some kind of apology or explanation for something they found objectionable about my recent success. Finally, my father cleared his throat and began speaking in the measured tone he used for serious family business. "Maya, we've been hearing things about your award ceremony. People from the community have been asking us questions about your speech, and we've seen some of the coverage online." He paused, and I realized they were approaching this conversation from a position of embarrassment rather than pride. Their daughter had achieved something significant enough to generate national attention, and their primary concern was managing the social implications of how that achievement reflected on them. "We're proud of your success," my mother added quickly, though her tone suggested obligation rather than genuine emotion. "But we're concerned about some of the choices you made during your acceptance speech." The word choices struck me as particularly revealing. They weren't questioning my career path or expressing newfound support for my artistic achievements. They were criticizing the way I had chosen to acknowledge the people who had actually supported my dreams, while failing to offer generic thanks to family members who had been absent from that support. What specifically concerns you about my speech? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the irritation building in my chest. Tommy shifted uncomfortably on the couch, and I could see him struggling with whether to participate in this conversation or distance himself from its implications. His loyalty was being pulled in multiple directions, caught between his allegiance to our parents and his growing recognition that their treatment of me had been problematic. "Maya, you thanked everyone except your family," my father said, with the kind of emphasis that suggested this omission had been both deliberate and hurtful. "People are asking us why our daughter didn't acknowledge the people who raised her, who provided for her education, who gave her the foundation that made her success possible." The accusation hung in the air between us, loaded with assumptions about gratitude, obligation, and the relationship between financial support and emotional validation. They seemed to believe that providing food, shelter, and basic educational expenses entitled them to credit for achievements they had actively discouraged and consistently dismissed. "Dad, I thanked the people who supported my filmmaking career," I replied carefully. "I thanked the people who came to my screenings, who encouraged my projects, who helped me develop my skills and vision as a documentary filmmaker. I thanked the people who showed up." "We showed up for 18 years, my mother interjected with more emotion than she had displayed since I arrived. "We showed up every day, making sure you had everything you needed to succeed in life. We paid for your education. We gave you a stable home. We taught you values and work ethic. How is that not showing up?" Her question revealed the fundamental disconnect in our understanding of support and recognition. They had indeed provided financial stability and basic parental responsibilities, but they had consistently withheld the specific kind of encouragement and validation that would have actually supported my chosen career path. "Mom, you did show up for basic parenting responsibilities," I acknowledged. "But when it came to my actual dreams, my actual goals, my actual achievements in the field I'm passionate about, you were absent. You missed my film screenings because you had bridge games. You dismissed my awards because they weren't medical school acceptances. You refused to attend the most important night of my career because it conflicted with your social schedule." Tommy finally spoke up, his voice quiet but clear. "Maya's right. I've been thinking about this since the ceremony, and we haven't been supportive of her filmmaking at all. We've been actively discouraging it for years." My parents turned to look at him with surprise, as if their golden child had unexpectedly shifted sides in a conflict they had assumed was isolated between them and me. Tommy's acknowledgement of the pattern carried extra weight precisely because he had been the beneficiary of their undivided support and approval. "Tommy, that's not fair," my mother said with a tone that suggested betrayal. "We've always wanted what's best for both of you. Maya's chosen a very difficult and unpredictable career path, and we've been trying to protect her from disappointment and financial instability. But she's not disappointed or financially unstable," Tommy replied with growing confidence. "She just won a national award. She's getting offers from major companies. She's making money doing work she's passionate about. Everything you worried about didn't happen, and everything you discouraged her from pursuing is succeeding." His defense of my achievements felt surreal given our family dynamics, but it also felt crucial. For years, I had been the only voice arguing for the validity of my chosen path. Having Tommy recognize and articulate my success provided a perspective that might carry more weight with our parents than my own advocacy ever could. My father responded with the kind of stubborn logic that had characterized his opposition to my career from the beginning. One award doesn't guarantee long-term success, and the entertainment industry is notoriously unstable. We wanted Maya to have security and predictability in her career, like medicine or law. "But that's not what Maya wanted," Tommy continued, and I realized he was fighting for something larger than just my right to pursue filmmaking. He was challenging their entire approach to parental expectations and their children's autonomy. Since when is what she wanted more important than what's practical and responsible? my mother asked, her voice rising with frustration that her son was not supporting the position she had assumed he shared. The question crystallized everything that had been wrong with our family's approach to my dreams and achievements. They had never considered the possibility that what I wanted might be both practical and responsible, that passion and financial stability could coexist, that their definition of success might be too narrow to encompass the variety of meaningful careers available in the modern world. Since she proved that her way works, I said, entering the conversation with a directness that surprised even me. Since she demonstrated that following her passion led to recognition, opportunities, and financial success. Since she showed that your fears were unfounded and your opposition was holding her back rather than protecting her. The use of third person felt strange, but it also felt powerful. I was talking about myself as if I were separate from the family dynamics that had shaped my childhood, as if I had stepped outside their sphere of influence and could observe their limitations from a position of strength rather than dependence. "Maya, we're your parents," my father said with the kind of emphasis that suggested this fact should end all debate about their authority and wisdom. "We have more life experience than you do, and we can see potential problems that you might not anticipate." "But you've been wrong about almost everything," I replied, feeling a clarity that had been building for weeks finally crystallizing into words. "You were wrong about my potential as a filmmaker. You were wrong about the viability of documentary careers. You were wrong about the importance of my achievements. You were wrong about what I needed from you as supportive parents." My mother's face flushed with anger and hurt. "Maya, that's incredibly disrespectful. We've sacrificed for years to give you opportunities, and this is how you thank us?" "I'm not being disrespectful. I'm being honest about our relationship and the impact of your choices on my development as both an artist and a person. You provided financial support and basic stability, and I'm grateful for that. But you withheld emotional support for my actual goals and dreams, and that absence shaped my experience in profound ways." Tommy looked between our parents and me, clearly struggling with the escalating tension, but also seeming to recognize that this conversation had been necessary for years. "Maybe we can figure out how to move forward in a way that acknowledges everyone's perspectives," he suggested diplomatically. "Tommy, there's nothing to figure out," I said, with a finality that surprised all of us. "I'm not asking for retroactive support or trying to change the past. I'm explaining why my acceptance speech thanked the people who actually contributed to my success instead of the people who opposed it. I'm explaining why validation from strangers feels more meaningful than approval from family members who have spent years dismissing my achievements." My father stood up from his chair, pacing to the window with the kind of agitated energy that suggested he was struggling to maintain control over a conversation that wasn't proceeding according to his expectations. "Maya, you're being unfair. We love you and we've always wanted you to succeed. We just disagreed about the best path for that success." "Love and support aren't the same thing," I replied. "You can love someone and still undermine their confidence, dismiss their achievements, and refuse to show up for their important moments. You can love someone and still make them feel like their dreams don't matter to you." The distinction seemed to hit my mother particularly hard. She had always used love as an explanation and justification for parental choices, as if genuine affection could substitute for specific kinds of encouragement and validation that children need to develop confidence in their own judgment and abilities. "So what do you want from us now?" she asked, her voice carrying both defensiveness and genuine confusion. "What would it take for us to have a better relationship going forward?" Her question suggested an opening that I hadn't expected, an acknowledgement that our relationship needed repair and that they might be willing to consider changes to their approach. But it also revealed their continued misunderstanding of the situation. They seemed to think this was a negotiation about future terms rather than a reckoning with past choices and their ongoing consequences. "I want you to understand that I don't need your approval anymore," I said, choosing honesty over diplomacy. I've built a successful career and meaningful relationships without your support, and I've learned to validate my own achievements instead of waiting for your recognition. The statement landed with visible impact. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father stopped pacing, and Tommy looked like he was witnessing the collapse of family assumptions he had never questioned. I want you to know that your absence from my ceremony wasn't just disappointing, I continued. It was clarifying. It helped me understand that I've been seeking approval from people who are fundamentally unable to offer it, at least not for the things that actually matter to me. My father returned to his chair, sitting heavily as if the conversation had drained him of energy. Maya, we never meant to hurt you. We thought we were being responsible parents by encouraging practical career choices. I believe that your intentions were good, I replied, but impact matters more than intention, and the impact of your approach was to make me feel like my authentic self wasn't worthy of your support or celebration. Tommy finally spoke again, his voice thoughtful and measured. I think what Maya is saying is that we confused supporting her as a person with supporting our idea of who she should become. And when she became someone different than what we expected, we couldn't adjust our support to match who she actually was. His insight was more sophisticated than I had credited him with, and it offered a framework for understanding our family, dysfunction that didn't require villains or victims, just different perspectives on love, support, and the balance between guidance and acceptance. So where does that leave us? My mother asked, wiping her eyes with a tissue she had pulled from her purse. I considered her question seriously, recognizing that my answer would shape our family relationships for years to come. Part of me wanted to punish them for their years of dismissal and absence. Part of me wanted to demand apologies and acknowledgments that might never come. But the strongest part of me wanted to build something healthier and more honest than what we had maintained for so long. It leaves us with the opportunity to build a relationship based on who I actually am, rather than who you wanted me to become, I said. It leaves us with the chance to interact as adults rather than as parents trying to control an adult daughter's choices. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, covering territory we had never navigated as a family. We discussed the difference between financial support and emotional validation, the challenge of accepting children's autonomy when their choices don't align with parental expectations, and the possibility of rebuilding relationships around mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority. By the time I left their house that evening, nothing had been fully resolved, but everything had been acknowledged. They understood why I had thanked other people during my speech. I understood that their opposition had been motivated by fear, rather than malice. We all understood that repairing our relationship would require ongoing effort and fundamental changes to our patterns of interaction. The most significant shift was my own clarity about the relationship I wanted going forward. I no longer needed their approval to feel confident about my choices, but I was open to building a connection based on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. Whether they could adapt to that new dynamic remained to be seen, but I was no longer willing to sacrifice my authentic self to maintain their comfort. 6 months later, I stood in the production office of my new documentary series, surrounded by whiteboards covered in timelines, budget breakdowns, and story arcs that would guide the next phase of my career. The streaming platform deal had materialized into something even more ambitious than originally proposed. A 5-part series following different families navigating the immigration system, with Dreams on Hold, Isabella's story, serving as the pilot episode that had convinced executives to greenlight the full project. The office space itself represented a milestone I had never imagined reaching so quickly. Located in a converted warehouse in Culver City, it buzzed with the activity of a small but dedicated team assembled to bring complex stories to life with both artistic integrity and commercial viability. 3 researchers worked with immigration, lawyers, and community organizations to identify families willing to share their experiences. 2 editors managed the technical aspects of post-production while maintaining the intimate storytelling approach that had characterized my award-winning documentary. A producer with extensive experience in social impact filmmaking handled distribution, strategy, and partnerships with advocacy organizations. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of this new venture was the team I had assembled from people whose paths had intersected with mine during the journey from student filmmaker to professional director. Alex Chen had joined as associate producer after completing her own degree, bringing her experimental narrative skills to a project that benefited from multiple artistic perspectives. Nina, the assistant from my parents' old office who had reached out during the family business crisis documented in my inspiration, had transitioned into film research after discovering her talent for connecting with interview subjects and building trust within communities. The series had attracted attention from film festivals, advocacy groups, and media outlets interested in immigration stories told with nuance and depth. More importantly, it was creating real impact for the families involved. Isabella's legal case had been resolved favorably, partly due to increased public awareness generated by the original documentary. Her younger brother had received a scholarship to study journalism, inspired by watching his sister's story reach national audiences. Their parents had started a small business with support from community members who had connected with their experience through the film. But the professional success, gratifying as it was, represented only part of the transformation that had occurred since that night at the Dolby Theater. The more significant change involved my relationship with validation, achievement, and the complex dynamics of family expectations that had shaped my development for 22 years. My parents and I had settled into a new pattern of interaction that neither fully resolved our historical tensions nor ignored them completely. They made efforts to show interest in my work, asking questions about my projects, and occasionally sharing articles about my achievements with their social circle. I made efforts to include them in aspects of my life that didn't require their approval or understanding, maintaining connection while protecting my autonomy. The shift became most apparent during a family dinner 3 months after our confrontational conversation in their living room. Instead of dismissing my work or offering unsolicited advice about more practical career paths, they asked detailed questions about the production process, the challenges of working with vulnerable populations, and the impact the series was having on immigration policy discussions. Maya, we saw an article in the Times about your series influencing congressional hearings on family separation policies, my mother said as she served dessert. Can you explain how documentaries can affect political processes? Her question demonstrated a fundamental change in her approach to my career. Instead of questioning its viability or importance, she was trying to understand its mechanisms and influence. She was engaging with my work as legitimate and significant rather than dismissing it as impractical dreaming. My father contributed his own observations about media coverage of immigration issues, noting how different news outlets presented varying perspectives on the same policy questions. Your approach seems more balanced than what we usually see on television, he said. You're showing individual stories rather than just political arguments. Their comments weren't effusive praise or dramatic apologies for years of dismissal, but they represented genuine engagement with my professional achievements and artistic vision. They were learning to interact with the person I had become, rather than continuing to argue with the person they had wanted me to be. Tommy's evolution was even more pronounced. He had started attending screenings of my work, bringing friends from medical school who were interested in documentary filmmaking as a tool for health education and policy advocacy. He asked thoughtful questions about interview techniques, ethical considerations in documentary work, and the balance between artistic vision and social responsibility. Maya, I've been thinking about your approach to building trust with interview subjects, he said during one of our regular phone conversations. I'm wondering if some of those techniques might be useful in patient communication, especially with families facing difficult medical decisions. His question revealed how completely his perspective on my work had shifted. Instead of seeing filmmaking as irrelevant to serious professional pursuits, He was identifying connections between my skills and his own career development. He was recognizing that storytelling, empathy, and communication techniques had value across multiple fields. The changes in our family dynamics didn't erase the years of dismissal and missed opportunities for support, but they created space for building something healthier going forward. We were learning to interact as adults with different but equally valid professional paths, rather than as parents and child locked in conflict over predetermined expectations. But the most profound transformation involved my own relationship with success and recognition. The viral response to my acceptance speech had taught me something crucial about the difference between seeking validation and earning respect. For years, I had been chasing my parents' approval, modifying my dreams and minimizing my achievements in failed attempts to make them more palatable to people who couldn't appreciate them. The ceremony had forced me to choose between continuing that futile pursuit and celebrating the relationships that had actually supported my growth. By thanking my true supporters while acknowledging my parents' absence, I had claimed ownership of my success and its meaning. I had demonstrated that validation doesn't require universal approval, that meaningful recognition comes from people who understand and value your actual achievements. The professional opportunities that followed the ceremony were gratifying, but they were secondary to the personal breakthrough of learning to value my own judgment over other people's approval. I had stopped seeking permission to be proud of my accomplishments, stopped apologizing for pursuing dreams that others found impractical, stopped shrinking my achievements to make other people comfortable with their own limitations. This shift became most apparent during a speaking engagement at a high school in East Los Angeles, where I had been invited to discuss careers in documentary filmmaking with students interested in media arts. The audience included many first-generation college students whose families, like mine, held narrow definitions of professional success and viewed creative careers with suspicion. During the question and answer session, a 17-year-old girl raised her hand and asked, "How do you handle family members who think your dreams are stupid?" Her question brought me back to my own senior year of high school, when I had struggled with similar conflicts between family expectations and personal passion. But my answer came from a place of hard-won wisdom rather than defensive uncertainty. First, you have to understand that their reaction often reflects their own fears rather than any real assessment of your potential, I began. People who haven't been exposed to creative industries may genuinely believe they're unstable or impractical, even when evidence suggests otherwise. I continued by discussing the importance of building alternative support networks, developing thick skin for criticism that stems from ignorance rather than expertise, and maintaining confidence in your vision even when it's not widely understood or appreciated. But most importantly, I concluded, you have to decide whether you're going to live according to their definitions of success or according to your own sense of purpose and fulfillment. That choice will shape everything else about your career and your relationships. After the presentation, several students approached me with specific questions about their own family conflicts around creative pursuits. Their stories were variations on familiar themes: parents who wanted security over passion, relatives who equated artistic careers with financial instability, families who saw creative work as hobbies rather than legitimate professions. But I also noticed something hopeful in their questions. Unlike my generation, these students had access to examples of successful creative professionals, diverse career paths in media industries, and platforms for building audiences and generating income from artistic work. They were growing up in a world where creative careers were more visible and viable than they had been when I was their age. One student, a senior named Marcus who was considering film school despite his family's preference for engineering, asked about the practical aspects of building a sustainable career in documentary work. "My parents keep asking how I'll make money telling other people's stories," he said. "They understand why it might be fulfilling, but they're worried about financial stability." His question demonstrated a more sophisticated understanding of creative careers than I had possessed at his age. His parents were engaging with practical concerns rather than dismissing his interests entirely. and he was seeking concrete information about career development rather than arguing for the validity of his passion. Documentary filmmaking has multiple revenue streams, I explained, outlining opportunities in television production, streaming platforms, educational content creation, and corporate communications. Like any professional field, it requires business, skills, networking, and strategic career planning, but it's absolutely possible to build financial stability while pursuing meaningful creative work. After our conversation, I realized how much my own story had been shaped by the assumption that creative careers were inherently impractical and that family approval was necessary for personal confidence. The students I met that day were operating from different assumptions, approaching creative work as one of many legitimate career paths and seeking information rather than permission. The contrast highlighted how much cultural attitudes toward creative careers had evolved, but it also reinforced my understanding of how individual relationships with validation and approval could transcend broader cultural shifts. Regardless of external support for creative work, each person still had to navigate their own family dynamics, develop their own confidence, and choose their own definitions of success. That evening, as I drove home through Los Angeles traffic, I thought about the trajectory that had brought me from a high school student hiding my film projects from dismissive parents to a professional filmmaker mentoring the next generation of storytellers. The journey had required technical skill development, artistic vision, and business acumen, but it had also demanded emotional growth that extended far beyond career advancement. I had learned to separate my sense of self-worth from other people's understanding of my work. I had developed the courage to pursue my vision, even when it disappointed people whose approval I valued. I had discovered that meaningful support often comes from unexpected sources, and that chosen family can be more sustaining than biological relationships that lack genuine understanding or encouragement. Most importantly, I had learned that authenticity requires ongoing choices rather than single moments of revelation. Every project, every professional decision, every family interaction offered opportunities to choose alignment with my values over compliance with other people's expectations. The documentary series continued gaining momentum over the following months, generating conversations about immigration policy, family separation, and the role of storytelling in social justice advocacy. The professional recognition was satisfying, but it felt secondary to the knowledge that my work was contributing to important conversations and creating empathy across cultural and political divisions. Isabella graduated from high school with a full scholarship to study law at UCLA, crediting the documentary with raising her confidence about sharing her story and pursuing leadership roles. Her family's business had grown from community support generated by their film appearances. Other families featured in the series had experienced similar positive outcomes, reinforcing my belief that documentary work could create real impact beyond entertainment or artistic expression. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success was a letter I received from a viewer in Ohio whose teenage daughter was undocumented and facing uncertainty about her future in the United States. The mother wrote that watching Isabella's story had given her family hope and practical information about legal resources, but more importantly, it had helped her daughter feel less alone in her experience. "Your documentary showed my daughter that her dreams matter and that other people care about what happens to kids like her," the letter read. "She's been more confident in school and more willing to talk about her goals since watching Isabella's story. Thank you for making her feel seen." Reading that letter, I understood something fundamental about the relationship between personal authenticity and social impact. By choosing to pursue my vision despite family opposition, by building my career around stories that mattered to me, by refusing to compromise my artistic integrity for easier approval, I had created work that resonated with people facing their own struggles with identity, belonging, and the courage to pursue their dreams. The circular nature of that impact felt profound. My willingness to disappoint my parents in order to remain true to my artistic vision had enabled me to create work that helped other people navigate similar conflicts between family expectations and personal authenticity. My choice to thank my actual supporters, rather than offering generic family acknowledgments, had inspired other people to examine their own relationships with validation and recognition. As I parked outside my apartment that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that evening at the Dolby Theater, when I scanned the audience looking for faces that weren't there. The absence that had felt so painful at the time had ultimately become a liberation, forcing me to build my identity around chosen connections rather than obligated relationships. I was no longer the young woman seeking her parents' approval for dreams they couldn't understand. I was a professional filmmaker whose work created impact, whose vision attracted support, whose authenticity inspired others to pursue their own paths with greater confidence. I had built a career that aligned with my values, surrounded myself with people who understood and supported my goals, and learned to measure success according to my own definitions rather than external expectations. The transformation hadn't been comfortable or quick, but it had been necessary. Sometimes the most important growth happens when we stop trying to force other people to see our value and start building lives that reflect our authentic selves, regardless of who approves or understands. That night, as I reviewed footage for the next episode of the series, I thought about all the young people who might watch these stories and feel inspired to pursue their own dreams despite opposition or misunderstanding. If my experience had taught me anything, it was that the courage to disappoint some people in order to remain true to yourself often leads to discovering support and recognition from sources you never expected. The woman who had stood on that stage 6 months earlier, holding an award and thanking everyone except her family, had been making a choice about identity and authenticity that would reshape everything that followed. She had chosen truth over comfort, chosen recognition from people who understood her work over approval from people who didn't, chosen to build forward rather than continue seeking backward validation. That choice had led to professional opportunities beyond anything I had imagined. But more importantly, it had led to a sense of alignment between my values, my work, and my relationships that felt sustainable and genuine. I was living according to my own definition of success, supported by people who appreciated my authentic self, creating work that mattered to me and to the communities I served. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.